In 1797, in this small kitchen, on a cold winter day in Vienna, Franz Peter Schubert was born on January 31st. He was the son of Franz Theodor and Elisabeth Schubert, and one of 5 of their 14 children that survived infancy. Franz Schubert's father was a schoolteacher, and a successful and respected one. His school flourished, and the Schubert family could soon move into a larger house. That house is now a garage, fittingly called the Schubert Garage. Little Franz started taking piano lessons with his older brother Ignaz, but it was the little boy's singing voice that stood out as exceptional. He therefore auditioned to become one of the Emperor's 10 Sängerknaben, boy choristers, something that could be attained only when he was a minimum of 10 years old. In 1808, when Franz was on his 10th year, he auditioned in front of one of the most powerful men in musical Vienna, Antonio Salieri, who was to become Schubert's teacher in composition. Schubert was accepted, and this meant that he would be put in a school called the Akademischer Gymnasium and live in the so-called Stadtkonvikt. It was what we today would call a boarding school. All this with no cost to the Schubert family. In the Gymnasium, he would get the best education available in Vienna. In the Stadtkonvikt, where he played violin in the youth orchestra, he had the opportunity to thrive in what really mattered to him: music. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Ludwig van Beethoven, Johannes Brahms. You can add many famous composers to the list of composers who worked and lived in Vienna. And of course you can add Franz Peter Schubert to that list, but there's actually one thing that separates Schubert from all those other composers, and that is that Franz Schubert is the only one that was actually born in Vienna. To be really correct, we should say that he was born in Lichtental, which was then considered a suburb of Vienna, but is now considered part of Vienna. When you speak about Schubert, it's important to get the historical context of Vienna of that time. Sometimes we apply our way of living, our way of society on some genius who lived 200 years ago. We should, for example, know that Schubert lived in a Vienna which had a secret police that was listening in to private conversations. You had all the correspondence, all the mail going through a hub controlled by the government who could read all the letters being sent. So everybody knew this. Everybody knew this. When you wrote a letter, you know it could be opened by a government official, read, and you could get in trouble for it. One of Schubert's good friends, Johann Senn, really did get in trouble and had to basically flee the country after he was imprisoned. Schubert's life was heavily impacted by the repression of the regime in Vienna in those days. The biggest example, the most important example, probably, is that you were required by law to get a certificate to marry a girl, which would state that you had sufficient income to support the family. Now, Schubert, as a composer who was, by the way, not at all famous during his lifetime and did not make much money at all, could simply have no chance of marrying anybody. That made him go to prostitutes, where he probably attracted the syphilis that killed him in such a young age. We should also know that the so-called Schubertiads, the small circle of friends that were having these house parties where Schubert was playing and a singer named Vogel was singing, and we will get to that later on. more in detail. But those were the typical get-togethers in those days, because you had spies everywhere. And the only safe haven to talk about anything political, for example, or what you felt, talk about anything, was with trusted friends in someone's home. Now, those friends of Schubert, many years after his death, his genius was discovered. And many of those friends telling their stories about Schubert and their friendship with him. We should be very careful about these stories. In their eyes, he was adored and beloved and the center of attention, and those people were the only ones that really understood his genius at the time. Was it like that, or was it that he gave basically free entertainment during some social evenings, which gives a much less flattering picture of those friends? We will see. One thing with Schubert is that many music lovers, they have this one piece that really reflects their love of Schubert. It could be the Unfinished Symphony. It could be one of the impromptus for solo piano. It could be the F minor Fantasy for duo piano. It could be the string quintet, or maybe Death and the Maiden, the string quartet. And it could be one of the songs, for example, Die Forelle. And why I give this long list is to show his incredible diversity of talent. Very few composers actually have written so many incredible masterpieces in different forms and genres. It's unbelievable. And all that he did under a very, very short life. So one thing that he was definitely very talented with, that not all composers were, and that he shared with Mozart, was that he was very good at putting words and music together to form something fantastic. And one of the things that has to happen for that to work is that the music itself, even if you don't understand the words, you can still highly enjoy the music. And that test, both Mozart and Schubert clearly pass. year is 1812. Franz Peter is now 15 years old, on his 4th year at the Stadtkonvikt. On the 28th of May, his mother Elizabeth dies from typhus. She is a heroine in the story of Franz Schubert. Beloved by her family, bearing 15 babies and raising 5, her life was barely recorded, since she was of the lower order and a woman. Unfortunately, we know way too little about the women in Franz Schubert's life. On July 26th in 1812, Schubert's voice broke. That meant he could not be a Sängerknabe anymore, but his studies in the gymnasium would continue. However, his desire to compose was stronger than his will to keep up with subjects such as, for example, mathematics, where he received a failed grade, which would eventually end his tenure at the Stadtkonvikt. Instead, he began a 10-month study to become a primary school teacher. He continued to compose whenever he found the time, and in 1814 his newly composed Mass was performed in the church where he had been baptized 17 years earlier. The piece included 6 vocal soloists, and the first soprano part was sung by a young lady by the name of Therese Grob. Schubert fell in love with Therese, but a law that forbade men in Schubert's low class to marry unless they could prove that they could provide support for a family made the prospect of a future marriage impossible. After finishing his 10-month training, Schubert starts working as an assistant in his father's school. He moves back to his family's house, where he starts string quartet practice sessions together with his father and his 2 brothers Ignaz and Ferdinand. Soon, these sessions were joined by friends, and eventually an ensemble was formed that could play, for example, Haydn's symphonies. Finally, in 1816, after a short time as a teacher, Franz Schubert leaves that line of work to become a full-time freelance composer. In many musical forms, there has been one composer who took that form and transcended it to another level. We have, for example, Beethoven with piano sonatas, and we have Mozart with piano concertos. In Franz Schubert's case, he elevated the lied, the German song, to a completely new level. When he was only 17 years old, which is fascinating to imagine, a 17-year-old person doing this, he wrote a masterpiece called Gretchen am Spinnrade. Gretchen am Spinnrade in German, and it would be Gretchen at the spinning wheel. This is from his favorite poet, which was Goethe, and it is from Goethe's famous Faust. Now I will tell a little bit of a very quick summary of what happens up until this moment in Faust, when Gretchen is sitting by the spinning wheel. Faust is a middle-aged man who is depressed, even thinking of suicide. He thinks his life is behind him and his best years are behind him. And Mephistopheles, the devil, comes to him and says, well, I will make your life good again. But the price to pay is that at the end of this road you will die and you will come with me and be my servant in hell. And Faust, he takes the deal. One of the things they do is that Faust drinks this potion which makes him a man that is very attractive to young women. He sees Margarete, who is Gretchen. He becomes obsessed with her, and at first, when he approaches her, she is shying away. She thinks this is not good. There is something strange with this, something immoral. However, with lots of plotting and lots of side stories here that will lead up to Gretchen becoming completely obsessed with Faust. And he and Mephistopheles, they together have manipulated her into this state. And now she sits by the spinning wheel and she knows that this is not good. This will lead to disaster. And normally, if you are madly in love, you would feel extremely happy. Gretchen is not happy. She is extremely sad because she knows this is a road to nowhere, or actually a road to tragedy. And her words are, "My peace is gone. My heart is heavy. I will never ever find peace again." And this emotional complexity that this situation with Gretchen entails is one of the reasons why Schubert's songs are so fantastic. And ironically, the emotional complexity was one of the reasons why he didn't become so famous and well known during his own lifetime. Because, well, the Vienna people wanted nice little happy tunes that they could sing along with. And this was not it. So you have here Gretchen sitting at the spinning wheel, and how Schubert uses the piano in the beginning before the singer enters sounds like this. And this is, of course, the spinning wheel. And the spinning wheel is also a symbol of Gretchen's unhealthy, anguished obsession with Faust. Now, it's a little bit interesting that Schubert's main teacher, you could say, was Salieri. Salieri, what did he do? Well, he made grand operas of 2 hours with lots of special effects, with a lot of singers involved. Big spectacles. Well, what did Franz Schubert, what would turn out to be his star student, what did he want to do? Well, he wanted only a singer, a pianist, and a few minutes of your time. And with that, he could, within those few minutes, he made a lot greater things than Salieri could do in 2 hours. So already the next year, and now he's 18, he wrote another masterpiece, which is called the Erlkönig. And it's a horrible, horrible story about a man riding through the woods on a horse with his son. The son is frightened because he knows that the Earl King, the Erlkönig, is out in the woods trying to steal little children like himself from their parents. And they ride fast, and the father is holding his son tight, 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 tight. And he holds him so tight that he discovers that when they come home and they are in safety, that the child is dead. And so this dramatic story, again, Schubert comes up with this phenomenal entry in the piano before the singer comes in. It sounds like this. It's a new way of using the piano part. The more normal way would be for example, how Schubert does it in Heiden Röslein, another song, where he just goes the whole piece. And it's super easy, which Erlkönig is not. It's not easy. It's very, very, very difficult actually for the pianist. It's a famous piece that way for all pianists to be able to play. Now, Schubert could also write songs without words, as in this wonderful impromptu in G flat major, which I will play for you. And first we have the singer sings this. You might have heard it. It's a very, very beloved piece. Now, we have in the middle this. And Andras Schiff, he describes this as water flowing by. I love that, how that could be very beautiful. And then we have the left hand, who will simply be the accompaniment. So that's kind of the pianist. Now, it starts in this serene atmosphere, but it will turn into much more dramatic moments, I promise you.